Good morning, everybody. We've just gone past 10 o'clock, so we'll get underway. Firstly, we're going to start with the Karakia. Are there any volunteers for this before I ask Councillor Ngātaki? There being none. Kia ora.
Morena tātai. Ai, he ino I tātai. He honore he kororia he mai ngā rongo ki te mata te whenua, whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Hangai te atua nā kai hai ki roto ki tēnā ki tēnā mātai. Whakatongia tō wairua tāpū, ake āmini.
Amene. Thank you, Councillor Ngātaki. Firstly, we'll move on to apologies. And at this stage, for either the meeting or lateness, we have Councillor Smith, Councillor Mahuta and Councillor Pike. Absence or lateness. Can we have a mover and a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Brown and Councillor Lee. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Before I move on, I'd just like to introduce William here. William is our democracy advisor, and he's on his own today, so be nice. Yes, we are always nice. And I'd like to welcome the GMO staff that are here today, and thank you, Neville, for coming along as well. Item 3, we're going to need to table again. Unfortunately, our KEG chair, Susan Law, although we've, Julie and I met with her last week, she's unavailable today, but hopefully will be with us next time. So thank you, Neville, for stepping in. 4 is confirmation of today's agenda. Are there any comments or amendments? If I can have a mover and a seconder for that, please. Thank you, Councillor Ngātaki and Councillor Buckthorpe. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Sorry. The next agenda is disclosures of interest. Okay. So I had one in one of the confidential items today, in 17.2. So once we move into confidence, I'll be leaving the chair and asking the deputy chair to take the chair just to keep everything safe, and then I can just be a representative of Taupo and answer any questions to the best of my ability if there are any. So then we will move on to agenda item number 6, which is confirmation of minutes. Welcome, Councillor Pike. No problem. So before I ask for a mover and a seconder, is there any comments or queries on those minutes? Oh, fantastic. There being none, can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Goddard. And a seconder? Councillor Lee, thank you. All those in favour? Against? Carried. We'll then move on to item 7, which is a financial delegation. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, so this is to seek a decision from you today in relation to the provision of financial delegations to the Coordinating Executive Group and the Management and Governance Subgroup of KEG also. So the background to this is that there are current financial delegations are $20,000 for the KEG chair via the M&G subgroup, or $20,000 in matter of expediency for the KEG chair if there's no M&G sitting. The unlimited delegation within the LTP and the annual plan sits with you as a group, as joint committee, and we're talking about here the unbudgeted reserves that get carried over into, or unbudgeted costs that get carried over into our reserves every year. So the Local Government Act does allow you as a joint committee to delegate to ensure the efficient and effective conduct of local business, and it does limit that delegation, however, of unbudgeted reserve funds to operational expenditure. At the recent meeting, we came to you with a proposal to use some of those unbudgeted reserves for the extension of a fixed term role, and we got some clear feedback in those conversations that perhaps the amount that we were asking for, or maybe it was the way that we presented it, but either way, it was seen as an operational issue, and we were invited to have a look at whether or not we could amend delegations to keep governance at governance and give more efficiency and opportunities at the executive level. So that's what we've done. And we've come back with a number of an option for you, I should say. And that is that we set a delegation for KEG at a cumulative annual amount of $150,000 or less. Anything above $150,000 remains with you as the joint committee. There is, irrespective of the amount set, in this case the recommendation is $150,000 or less, but irrespective of that, the use of the delegation is limited only to the amount that's in the reserve funds, so we can't go into deficit. And the KEG chair or the deputy KEG chair in their absence has the full delegation of the $150,000 for matters of urgency. All previous financial delegations of KEG and M&G therefore get rescinded, and we report to you on financial delegations used at the next joint committee after it's used. So to conclude, it's to assist in the efficiency of the executive and governance time. Approval of an appropriate financial delegation is requested, and for allocation of targeted rate reserve funds only for matters relating to operational expenditure.
Thank you, Julian. One question I just had is it inclusive or excluding GST? Because I mean that 15% can make a bit of a difference.
Ordinarily, I know it's not written there, but ordinarily we talk excluding GST.
Okay.
Certainly for when we deal with the regional council budgets, it's all excluding GST.
And is that enough? I mean, it's not a lot of money in the big picture, I would have thought.
And just some background for yourself, Madam Chair, just some background. We did a review of the delegations held by chief executives, and that's what we're going. This is talking about giving the delegation to KEG, which is the chief executive of emergency management, and the delegations range anywhere from $100,000 at the lowest end up to, I think it's $2 million. Somebody's got $2 million budget somewhere within the region, or thereabouts. So, you know, $150,000 is at the lower end. But it's when we've looked over our use of or our request for the use of the unbudgeted costs over the last 4 years, it has been under, H1 has been under $150,000. Varied from $30,000 for some ICT. There's been, and then there's been probably a couple at around $120,000 for extension of fixed-term roles, useful fixed-term roles. So we think it will capture our experience to date.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, comments for Julian on this agenda item? Councillor Buckthorpe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Julian, the 150,000, is that just a one-off? Like they have the ability to spend 150,000 in a one-off situation, but it can be more than that, up to what's the total in the reserves, or is it 150,000 per annum?
Yeah, it's 150. The delegation is $150,000 per annum, or so it could be a one-off spend, or it's capped at multiple different spends up to $150,000 throughout the individual financial year, but only if there is enough money in the budget in the reserves for 150,000.
And that will be enough to cover the extra needed for what I forget what it was, Anna referred to it, the proposition that we proposed at our last meeting for spending that money there. Is that enough for that?
Yes, it would have. It was enough for that, and it was enough. It would have. It's been slightly more than we've needed. We've used the unbudgeted reserves or requested permission of the unbudgeted reserves over time. I would probably be, if there is an appetite to go higher, I would probably have a level of discomfort around that, and I will tell you why. Even though I'm very grateful for the flexibility that may be inferred in that, you've got to remember that the money that's gone into the reserves is money that was allocated by you something else. It was allocated for a work program somewhere that has not been completed for whatever reason, or a project that has not been completed. It's not money that was underrated. It's ordinarily money that just has not. It's been rated for a particular purpose and has not been spent on that purpose for a multitude of reasons. So I would not want to get into the situation of having too much flexibility or too high a limit in that, because it could put me or whoever else is in this seat in the future in a predicament that we're coming back to you saying, we've actually been spending this money, but now we realize that we're short in an area of core business. So it provides the flexibility. It's enough there to cover our needs, but it doesn't overcommit us that we have to come back and say we've spent the money in the wrong place and we now need to ask you for something extra.
That was going to be around basic. My next question was people on the outside looking in, or the audit process. It's a big jump from 20,000 to 150,000. We need to be clear about why we're putting that much in. But I mean, at the end of the day, it all comes back to this committee as an agenda item within the 12 months of this pen. And LG and these sort of organisations have the most robust audit systems there are. So I don't have a problem with it. Happy to move.
Thank you, Councillor Buckthorpe. So are there any other questions or points of clarification needed around the table? There being none, we will resolve to 1, that the report financial delegations be received. 2, that the Waikato Joint Committee set a financial delegation to KEG of up to 150,000 for allocating any targeted rate reserve funds for operational expenditure. That the KEG chair or deputy chair in their absence have full delegation of up to 150,000 for targeted rate reserve fund for operational expenditure at M&G subgroup in matters of urgency. Number 4, financial delegation is cumulatively capped to the full delegation amount in any one financial year. 5, that any or previous financial delegations to the KEG or management and governance subgroup be rescinded. And 6, that any financial delegations undertaken to be reported to the Joint Committee at the meeting immediately following any allocation of the targeted rates reserve funds. And we have Councillor Buckthorpe has moved. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Grant. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. And before I move on to item 8, it was remiss of me not to welcome our REMA from NEMA, Lily Folds, who joins us online, and we'll hear from Lily shortly. So agenda item number 8. Julian, response and recovery costs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this report is to advise the Joint Committee on the response costs for the January and February, I would also probably say, and beyond 2023 weather events, commonly referred to these days as the North Island severe weather events, and to seek a decision from you on approving my group manager, group controller, group recovery manager recommendation related to the wider operational and recovery costs. So the background to this is that the Group Emergency Coordination Centre was activated on the 28th of January through to the 6th of March in response, and then from the 6th of March onwards in the 90-day transition to recovery period. The Emergency Coordination Centre was set up and supported 8 local authorities during the North Island severe weather events, also coordinating requests for assistance from other civil defence groups around the country, such as Hawke's Bay, Auckland, via NEMA at the National Crisis Management Centre. Thames Coromandel District Council and Waikato District Council undertook the largest amount of operational cost and recovery activity. And as I alluded to earlier, the Group Emergency Management Office established a regional recovery office to support and, where necessary, coordinate the local recovery activities that are undertaken subsequently. So you will see that the amount of money that we're talking about for the GEC itself, the stand-up of the GEC for that response activity, the amount of unrecoverable costs was 272,576. And even though recovery is still being tidied up and there's still some recovery work ongoing, the initial figures that we have for the 90-day transition period is 40,110. So a cumulative of $312,686. Now, the Waikato Civil Defence Group does not allocate a dedicated response or recovery budget. So all that money went we're using the overdraft straight away. Central government only considers reimbursement of welfare costs, and none of that $312,000 that I've talked about there falls into that category. The Waikato Group Plan, which is our rule book, states that in the interim, all costs related to CDEM emergencies lie where they fall. So each of the councils, each of the agencies, all absorb the initial costs. It also states that the CDEM group, you, are responsible for all costs associated with the activation of the GEC. And that local authorities are responsible for all costs associated with their own CDEM personnel, their own EOCs, facilities and resources. So whilst that makes it quite simple that the activation of the GEC and the activation of the EOC are the responsibility of the individual authorities, Section 9.7.3 states that once the emergency is concluded, the group controller will recommend which costs can be met by the group, so this is operational costs. For example, where the operational costs for the local response have shown to have a consequential regional benefit. So that's the same for recovery also. It's the same threshold for consequential regional benefit. So it's fair to say, as I've alluded to earlier, there were significant operational costs incurred by Thames Coromandel District Council and for Waikato District Council, for example, through the movement and disposal of solid waste and the use of helicopters to move personnel and equipment. Having reviewed it, the response as a whole on this occasion, as the group controller and as the group recovery manager, I do not recommend that the response or recovery costs incurred by the local authorities meet the threshold of providing consequential regional benefits. Therefore, my recommendation is that the costs stay where they lie, which is at that council level. So in reference, so that's the, if you want, that's the decision around section 9.7.3. In relation to the GEC costs now, we go back to the GEC response and recovery costs, which I've pointed out there as 312,000. By us absorbing that cost, because we have to under the group plan, we will now theoretically go into a budgetary deficit at the end of the financial year by $312,000, because we don't have a response or recovery budget. However, building on my previous conversation, when we went into the response and went into the recovery, we've not undertaken previously budgeted and programmed work. So that money was there, and all that time was there for other work that we've not done, and therefore we've now got a corresponding underspend. And subject to advice from yourself to the contrary, my recommendation is that we don't try and bring the previously budgeted and programmed work back on track, because we just extend the work program out for a longer period of time rather than trying to run two things concurrently. We just reprioritize and extend out. Consequently, that will mean that the response and the recovery costs that we've talked about can be absorbed on the whole into the operational costs of the GMO. We'll be asking, therefore, any additional budget. So the impact for yourselves are the work program gets extended. But having had a look at it, even with a full staff, we wouldn't be able to do this year's and last year's, we'd be extending something. So
Yeah, I just, from my perspective, Julian, I would have thought that, I mean, you can't budget for natural disasters either, can you? So I fully sort of support this, but I also think that it's probably perfect timing in the planning cycle of local government and regional council, in that we're going into an RTP process, so we can reevaluate where we are work plan wise and whatnot, and make sure we have a robust submission to regional council. But, are there any other questions, Councillor Buckthorpe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Julian, I agree with the proposal as well. One question, or two, I've got one question, one comment. The question is, can we dip into the reserves to help fund this if we need to? If there's no need to, then that's fine. The other comment I was going to make, that surely now, given that we don't budget for emergencies or response and recovery, we should still have data available for at least 10 years. And do we consider sort of going back, putting together a spreadsheet where we get an average of those response costs over that 10-year period and 20 years as we go along? And do we actually start rating for a portion of that, so that we can actually build up a reserve going forward? Sure, we can't anticipate what emergencies we're going to have, but if we've got an average over a number of years, and we can rate for that, or a portion of it, is that something worth considering?
through yourself, Madam Chair. Yeah, absolutely. It is something. It is data that we've had previously, and we've looked at previously, and we've certainly had this conversation at the coordinating executive group, and I think we've had it here as well at a previous meetings. There are advantages and disadvantages to doing it. There is no, I would say when you speak to members, there is different opinion. There is no consistent voice on this. There will be some people that would say that we're rating the residents of our region for something that may not happen in their tenure. Others would say we're saving ourselves an increase in rates, a sharp increase in rates for the residents that are around us in the future when we get a one-off event like this. So there are two schools of thought. We can certainly go away, come back with those figures, the most up-to-date figures of what a response costs, and whether or not there's an appetite by members to, particularly given the chair's comments that we're in the LTP cycle, that we could certainly come back at the next meeting with some figures for you to consider.
Yeah, I brought it up because they are becoming more consistent, these events, and in some areas more than others. But it's generally, yeah, it's across the board from Northland to Southland at the end of the day. And I think it's something we need to consider.
Councillor Deputy Mayor Goddard. It's just the right-hand side.
That one? Is it mostly staff time, or is it a mixture of staff time and external costs?
It's predominantly staff time. So there'll be some minor, I say minor, very small amount of sundries, such as feeding the staff that were working in the coordination centre and other stuff like COVID tests and alike for just operating. But the vast majority of that is staff time.
Thank you, Julian. I just wonder if it might be helpful before a meeting, future meeting, having a workshop around where we're at, what sort of has project or work streams have suffered, and how our submission for the LTP may look and feel, just for the newer members around the emergency management table. It just might be helpful to understand how that works, if that's okay.
Perfect.
Great. Are there any further comments or questions for Julian? There being none, the move that that the report response and recovery costs be received, that the Joint Committee approves the Group Controller's recommendation that all response costs lie where they fall, and that the Joint Committee approve the Group Recovery Manager's recommendation that all recovery costs lie where they fall. Can I have a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Brown, Councillor Ngātaki, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. We move on to agenda item number 9, which is disaster relief funding update. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a brief report. So to provide you an update on the status of the disaster relief fund that was provided to the group from central government. On the 7th of March this year, the Waikato CDM Group, EU, received a government contribution of $500,000 for disaster relief fund. So therefore, ultimately, you are responsible as a group for that money. That money was allocated based on an agreed formula at KEG to 4 councils, and it was earmarked for 4 councils clearly in the minister's letter. But the amount of apportionment was agreed at a coordinating executive group. So because you are responsible ultimately for that money, if it's not spent appropriately or it's not spent at all, then central government will come back to you, not to the individual councils, and come back to you for the money to be repaid to them. Hence why it's come to this report, this committee. So one of the funding guidelines requires that, this is central government guidelines, requires that any disaster relief funds unspent after 6 months must be returned to the Crown. That being the 7th of September this year. So we've been in touch, the group office, the staff have been in touch with the 4 councils that have been allocated the money, and those councils have provided sufficient detail, high-level detail, to show that the money's been committed, financially committed, and that the reporting or the policies that they've got in place align with the government guidelines. So we've not gone into the level of detail of asking where exactly that money's been spent. We've just asked to see the high-level policies around how that money was going to be prioritised. We're satisfied that that aligns with the disaster relief fund guidelines from central government, and therefore removes the risk of somebody coming back and saying it's been inappropriately spent, so the group have to repay it on behalf of Karakia District Council as one of the signatories, for example. And we're also happy that the money has been committed and will be distributed by the 7th of September. That's the update. Chair.
Any questions or comments, Councillor Brown?
Thank you. I'm just quite interested in this. Who actually evaluates this? Where the money's spent, and who actually does the final decision as an audit?
So the group has to, Chair, the group has to report back to NEMA. So NEMA will request an update. They were the people that signed the letter on behalf of the minister. Send it to us, so they will do the audit of the money. So what level of detail that gets into will be interesting. So we just don't know yet. Lily may be able to shed some light on it or may not, but I've certainly not been involved in auditing of disaster relief funds by central government before. I have been involved in I've been involved in central government or NEMA reviewing other expenditure in relation to COVID, and I can tell you the pencils were pretty sharp, and the detail that was requested was down to the cent kind of thing. So that's why that would be my gut feeling, is it would be quite a detailed request. But at this moment in time, we are not asking that detailed of the councils. We're allowing councils to do what they need to do and get that out, and we're meeting the high level expectations of the guidelines.
Councillor Buckthorpe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to add a bit to that, Boo, there's really clear guidelines from central government as to how that money can and can't be spent. So each of the councils would have worked through that, I'm sure, as we did. Initially, our council was in two minds whether to uptake the money because it wasn't a lot of money, but created a lot of work and effort by staff. But we felt that there were a lot of people out there that even if they got $1,000 or $2,000, it'd be really, really helpful. And when we did float it, there was just there was a huge response, and it was all distributed. So I felt it was well worthwhile. And one question I had though was originally Matamata Piako didn't. They were going to hand the money back, but I was surprised to see in the report that they've spent or allocated it all. But Russell's not here to let us know, but yeah, interesting.
And perhaps they came down to the same solution that you did, that even if it was just, yeah. I'm not speaking for Russell, obviously, but yes. Are there any other questions or comments? There being none, the resolution is that the report disaster relief funding update be received. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Ngātaki, Councillor Lee, thank you. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Right, agenda item number 10 is our Auckland Emergency Management Report. Are we hearing from Aaron? Wonderful. Welcome, Aaron.
Madam Chair, committee members, my presentation today is going to be on the Auckland Flood Response Review and how it would impact the Waikato. The purpose of the presentation is to provide members of the Joint Committee an in-depth look at the key recommendations of the Auckland Flood Response Review, which are relevant to the Waikato region. It will provide a high-level timeline of the event, opportunities for improvement, and areas where the Waikato Setting Group already have appropriate structures, systems, and processes in place. Next slide, please.
Aaron, just before we start, what would you prefer, questions during the presentation, or would you like to do the presentation first and we'll do questions at the end?
We can do questions at the end.
Okay, are members comfortable with that? Thank you.
So the presentation will cover the following: a high-level overview of the event and timeline, key recommendations that relate to the Waikato, and what the Waikato is doing well. Next slide, please. Thursday, the 26th of January at 20:57, Met Service issued a heavy rain warning for Auckland. On Friday, the 27th of January at 15:52, severe thunderstorm warning was in place, and Met Service advised of 60 millimetres of rain had fallen per hour, causing surface flooding. Between 1600 and 1700, more than 50 council hydrotel alarms had been triggered. 1621, the duty officer organised the first IMT meeting for 1700. Next slide, please. At 1710, there was a consideration of a declaration with Fens and Police asking about the threshold. At 1835, Met Service issues a severe thunderstorm warning. And at 1930, Auckland Emergency Management activates the emergency status orange, with the event being managed virtually. At 2030, the second IMT meeting commences, and the Met Service briefing predicts further torrential rain over the next 2 to 3 hours of up to 120 millimetres. At 2037, all Fens resources were fully utilised. Next slide, please. At 21:27, the Mayor signs a declaration of emergency. At 21:31, the Met Service issues a red warning for Auckland until 3 a.m. At 22:17, Auckland Emergency Management media release confirms a state of emergency. At 23:22, The Regional Coordination Centre advised that St John was now close to a system collapse. On Saturday, the 28th of January, at 0:30, the Beehive bunker was stood up with the Minister of Civil Defence in attendance. At 0:46, the controller formally requests USAR support, and at 01:16 AEM initial action plan was issued. As you can see, this was an extremely fast-moving event, with most of the damage occurring between 1600 and 2200, a 6-hour period. And next slide, please. The key recommendations that relate to the Waikato. Operational plans, which was recommendation 3, include in the Auckland Civil Defence Emergency Management Group plan supporting plans for high priority hazards and events and detailed documentation of the operating model for emergency response. Recommendation 7, public information management. Ensure that AEM members, including the PIM team, have the resource, training and capability to exercise their function relating to internal and external communications. Recommendation 12 and 16 relate to a common operating picture. Develop a centralised approach to and a system for intelligence capture analysis reflecting SIMS protocols to ensure improved situational awareness in emergency response events, and acquire or develop a common IT operating system for AEM and partner agencies to utilise during emergency response to facilitate sharing of intelligence and support improved real-time communications and decision making. And the concept of operations is the final one, which is really an overarching theme of the report. Next slide, please. Recommendation 3. So the Auckland Civil Defence Emergency Management Group Plan recognised that Auckland's natural hazards include flooding, river catchment and a superstorm, although the magnitude of the event that happened over that weekend couldn't have been anticipated. The group plan raised concerns that the capability to respond to a large-scale or widespread event had not been tested. In the review, it found that there were no current operational emergency management plans for high-priority events such as this. The Waikato Group currently has very few operational emergency plans. Management plans for reasonably foreseeable events. As this puts the Waikato Group in a potentially compromised position, particularly given the recent weather events. The Group Emergency Management Office has been working to create hazard-specific operational level plan templates for CDM professionals to utilise. Next slide, please. Recommendation 7 relates to public information management. The Auckland PIM staff were overloaded during this event with responsibilities for communication to Lifeline Utilities, media, the Mayor's Office, the public, key stakeholders and elected members via multiple channels. PIM staff juggled between dealing with media inquiries and the provision of public information. There was a lack of role clarity between managing media and engaging with media agencies as Lifeline Utilities and channels of critical public information. It was recommended in the report that there be consideration of additional PIM resourcing, including full-time specialist resource to ensure that communications, relationships, channels, systems, templates, and strategies are well planned and proactively managed outside emergency response. The current resourcing of the group PIM for the Waikato region consists of a roster of PIM, one from each council, to take on a weekly duty. The roster duty provides specialist PIM resource for the group duty officer to call upon during the initial stages of an emergency response. While this is a good first step in providing resilience, there is currently no one actively growing the role to ensure communications, relationships, channels, systems, and templates and strategies are well planned and proactively maintained outside the emergency response. As anticipated, that the soon-to-be recruited senior advisor, community resilience and recovery will mitigate this issue experienced in the Auckland flood response in the long term. Next slide, please. Common operating picture. A coherent common operating picture allows for greater situational awareness and allows for improved decision-making for not just Emergency Coordination Centre, but also partner agencies and lifeline utilities. IT operating systems, GIS platforms, and the ability to update dashboards in real time greatly improves the situational awareness at local and group levels. It was identified that AEM may also have been more proactive with regard to the timing of a declaration had they considered it more strategically. An overall lack of situational awareness and joined up intelligence was part of the problem. The current situation in the Waikato CDM group is that there is a service level agreement with the Waikato Regional Council to provide GIS support during emergencies. This, however, does not extend to provision of during BAU activities such as ongoing maintenance and development of GIS applications to enhance situational awareness for the region. To mitigate the outcomes experienced in Auckland floods, it is recommended that the Waikato Group needs a well-resourced, centralised approach to GIS data management that is consistent and equitable. This needs to involve key partners beyond the group member councils such as iwi, emergency services, lifeline utilities, and scientific and technical agencies. Next slide, please. Concept of operations. So this, the enlarged GEC, there's no specific recommendation in the report relating directly to the current Waikato CDM group concept of operations. The overall theme does convey the importance of having a fit for purpose concept of operations. The AEM operating model is focused around a centralised ECC or EOC with no focused delivery to its communities at a local level. This operating model has a range of implications. The positive implications is that there is the opportunity to have consistent practices, processes, and platforms, while the negative implications are that the opportunities to create relationships with a local level emergency services and communities are diminished. Another difficulty of the centralised model is the scope and magnitude of being able to conduct a coordinated response across a large geographical area with multiple stakeholders. The Waikato CDM Group concept of operations includes a centralised GEC concept. While this is a tactical option which can be utilised in extreme catastrophic events or an event such as COVID or foot and mouth disease, where another agency is leading the response, it was not utilised in the recent North Island severe weather events due to foreseeable complexities of managing numerous distinct localised emergencies. These were the same complexities identified in the Auckland response. We'll continue to utilise it as a tactical option, but it's unlikely it would be utilised in an event such as this. Next slide, please. What is working well? Following areas have been identified as issues within the Auckland report. However, it is anticipated that these are areas where the Waikato CDM Group already have appropriate structures and systems and processes in place and appear to be well placed should a large emergency occur. Relationships. Due to the operating model in the Waikato region, there is not a single point of failure for relationships with key stakeholders, such as public officials, emergency services, lifeline utilities, welfare service agencies, and full-time employed CDM staff. These relationships are fostered and maintained at a variety of levels, and high levels of trust have been established. This can be seen in the relationships between local controllers and the elected public officials, local emergency services, and welfare agencies. These relationships are also echoed at a regional level, with regular meetings and engagement opportunities occurring throughout the year. These relationships are enhanced by a tight-knit and engaged regional CDM community. Local delivery. One of the key takeaways of the Auckland report is the scale of the work required in the response was too large. With the Waikato being made up of 11 local authorities, this effectively chunks any response into manageable amounts for the group as a whole. It enables local CDM to build knowledge and understanding of their communities and ensure that they are at the heart of the response. It also allows other areas within the region who are not impacted to provide support to the impacted local authorities. In addition to this, it allows CDM to build and maintain close working relationships with key stakeholders and partner agencies. These key points of local delivery, supported by the wider group and coordinated through the GEC, is one of the key differences between the Waikato CDM group and the AEM operating models. The understanding of the controller framework. The report indicates several deficiencies that relate to controllers and the ability to contact controllers during the event. It also stated that it did not appear any individual as controller retained oversight of the response as the primary controller. For the Waikato CDM group, there is a good understanding amongst the group and local controllers of the hierarchical controller structure and the process for contacting group and local controllers. The controller policy outlines appointment process, structures and financial arrangements for the Waikato CDM group. This further enhanced by quarterly controller meetings, which provide professional development and training opportunities and a space to collaborate and build relationships. These quarterly meetings are integral to the development of controllers and provide a platform for consistency and collaboration. Next slide, please. That concludes the presentation. Are there any questions?
Councillor Brown?
Thank you, through the chair. Aaron, firstly, thank you very much for a very, very good report. It was well read and it covers most of the issues that I had. One of the key issues that seemed to come out of the Bush report, as far as we were concerned, was the lack of PIM or public information management. And this is a real area of concern. Now, what we've talked about here is to grow our public information. I think we've also got to adequately resource it as well, because this is a vital part for all the mayors. Having so many disparate areas, we've got to go out and be able to announce what's happening in the areas at the time and at a good and time of being able to be well aware. With that, if we tie in the GIS data system where they're getting consistent and accurate information prior or during the event, I think this is where the big lack seemed to become out, that there was not enough information going through from the services that were out in the field, ambulance, et cetera, coming back into the centralised data information. And you've actually mentioned it, but I just wanted to enhance that if I could, please.
Through the chair, those are great points, and that's part of the reason I raise them. Yeah, they're really integral points of the whole Bush report, and that's really just shows where it came apart for Auckland. It just wasn't that joined up approach, and they couldn't get that information in quick enough and get it out to the public so they knew what they needed to be.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Councillor Grant?
Thanks very much. And I'd also like to echo thanks for the comprehensive nature of the report. I think it's very, very helpful to see the experience and the way that it's been documented as well. I share the view in regard to the PIM issues, because I think it is one of the key elements of a response, and the lessons need to be taken from this in regard to what we can actually do and build in. And I would certainly be strongly recommending that we actually put some real thought and perhaps challenge Julian to look at the structures that could exist here, because I think the difference between perhaps the Auckland response and Waikato is the amount of local districts that we have, and the individual nature of each of those groups, and it's almost that plans need to be developed, and it was certainly the experience that Thames Coromandel felt during its events, was just how much was happening and how much information, and managing the flow of that information to ensure that only accurate information was being disseminated or available for people, and the very limited way that can actually be done through the processes that exist at the moment. So I'd absolutely endorse the views that you have put in there, and recommend very much that that's a subject that we should put some real thought into.
Councillor Buckthorpe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Really interesting report. I particularly enjoyed reading through the timeline process and how it all came to pass. And it just reiterated, I handed Julian a magazine a while ago regarding the flooding in the Hawke's Bay. There was a situation where jet boaters were wanting to help, and they were wanting direction from management, in other words, information management, about can they go and do what they were planning to do. And there was just this disconnect. And I think it's really important that we understand that these, and during that Auckland flood, I was actually in Auckland at the time, so I was at a specialist appointment and I was driving on the motorway at 6 o'clock, and the rain was horrendous, and I couldn't understand why the authorities hadn't even why they hadn't cancelled the Elton John concert, because it was I had two of my kids were going to that actually, and it was just unbelievable. And that in itself created a lot of problems for the council with the bus delays and everything. But it's this public information management. It's really key, and something that came back to us after Gabriel in the Karakia region. We had meetings within our local communities, and the one thing that resonated with me was a lot of the residents were really upset that they didn't know where to go, and that information wasn't getting out there. And I know in the old days we had the civil defence centres, or the old signs on specific buildings, whether it was a school and everybody knew that's where they go. Now they don't know, and I think it's something we need to look at a bit harder, because when the rubber hits the road with these events, it happens really quick, and people want to know. So, yeah, whether we're having a discussion around that. Julian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the two aspects. The PIM, I hear what you're talking about. I mean, you can go back to the Canterbury earthquakes, you can go through the Kaikoura earthquakes, you can go and have a look at Port Hill fires, you can go to Nelson, and you can look at Auckland emergency management, and you can look at the Hawke's Bay, and they all say the same thing, that people want to know what's happening, what you want them to do, and what you're doing. So what they can expect to happen, what you're doing, really just, but it's constant. And we are fighting a battle as organizations, in terms of there is another, unless we fill that void and we fill it quickly, there is another source of truth, and it's somebody else's truth about what's going on. So I hear you about the PIM, and I'm, as Aaron's quite rightly articulated in the report, it is an area that could catch us out as a group, that we need to put more effort into, and it is something that is certainly a priority for the moment. So I hear you, and I hear the challenge from Councillor Grant in terms of looking at different structures, because one of the, I mean, my challenge back to the local authorities is this: at the moment, I have 11 councils who all offer up a comms manager for a duty, and therefore, in theory, a pool of comms managers who are available to go and support TCDC or to support Hauraki when it really does become quite problematic. So there's a pool, I'm not talking about all 11, but there is a pool of people there who can go and work in that area. What I do find, and it's part of the local government conversation, is that everybody will say, I can provide somebody on call, but actually my comms managers are really busy. And I've got, even if I'm not in an emergency, my comms people may not be able to go and support TCDC or Hauraki. So it is a real challenge for us, but I hear the challenge from you, and I'll go away and have a look at the structure. In terms of the civil defence centres, or the old welfare centres and the signs, there's something to be said about muscle memory. But muscle memory also, in terms of, I've seen the sign, I know where to go, but that also causes, the purist in me says, it also causes, muscle memory causes a problem in you react in a way that you've always reacted don't want you to. We want to tell you what's happening. We want to tell you what we want you to do, and we want to tell you what they can expect. And if people are walking past the Civil Defence Centre sign and is a major event, and they go to that site and we're not going to use it, then because it could be a number of reasons, it could be assessed as it's in the wrong location, or it could be assessed that it's at risk. So the reason that we've gone to the approach that we have is we should be doing a rapid assessment of the sites available to us and how they've been impacted or not by the emergency, if it's a rapid onset event, and then we should be communicating where we want them to. We know where we're sending them to is safe. We know where we're sending them to is staffed, resourced, rather than them turning up at the local school hall. And what will happen as a result of that, and look, there's some good stuff that will come out of that. They will turn up and they'll find a key and they'll open it themselves and they'll set up their own community-led centre. It will, which is good. People are safe, and there's that local community buy-in and local community. But ultimately, we are still then responsible for that site. Even though we didn't open it, we're responsible for the safety of the people in that building. Try to get them out of that building once they're in there and they've set up the tents. And we tell them that there's a more appropriate facility that's got all the coffee, tea, and safety and warm blankets in the world. They won't go. So it's one of those. It's one of those tensions. If someone does set up, then I'm really clear with the welfare team. If someone does set up their own community-led centre, we don't kick them out. We support it. We just accept that it's there and we go and support it rather than trying to force everyone into something else. We try to avoid it if we can. So there is no. I suppose where I'm at is it's a safer, more efficient model for the people to be able to send them. So if I go back to the North Island severe weather events, the Gabriel for us, it wasn't a rapid onset event for us. We knew the weather was coming. We were watching it and we were making decisions. And part of the conversation I was having, the direction I was given to the local controllers was to go and identify, and it comes back to the operational plan stuff that Aaron talks about. Another one of our Achilles heels is we know where we're going to flood. We know it's going to be Kaiawa. We know it's going to be Grantham Street in Hamilton. We know it's going to be in Tikawiti. We know all the areas, all the councils know where those floods are going to happen. So identify which houses are likely to be impacted and open a civil defence centre, or identify a civil defence centre that's close by, get it staffed, resourced and open now in readiness for that reasonably foreseeable flood coming through, and communicate that it's, if you feel the need to evacuate, or if we do evacuate, this is where you need to go. So what it sounds like to me is part of that was done, because I know that buildings were identified in Hauraki, but we probably didn't do enough of the communicate, or in fairness, we probably did, but we just weren't operating in the right channels, because not everybody listens to the channels that we're on. So I do think that the approach of having a as required, appropriate, rather than a lot of buildings signposted is the way to go. But I do hear the value in people don't go on social media, they don't go on the internet. When things happen, the muscle memory, they want to know where to go.
Thank you, Julian. And we're going to go Councillor Ngātaki, Councillor Pike, then Councillor William, Deputy Mayor Williams.
Kia ora. Thank you for your report. Just sitting here and listening to everyone's kōrero. Yeah, I also agree, because I was up there. I live in the North Waikato, so Tuakau and Pukekohe is where I'm at, or where I was at the time. But definitely just reinforcing some of the things I've heard today, just around the info, the timing, the planning, the coordination. I know with us up in the North Waikato, a lot of the local knowledge as well, when we talk about relationships, is something that we use. I think for us as moving forward, it'll be good for us to reflect on what's happened. And I like the idea about getting some data to maybe look at what we could predict. I know it's not going to always be like that, but I know for us up in the north, we are already preparing our communities up there, to be looking after ourselves. What's our plans? What's our areas in the right places for different circumstances? Just because someone said it earlier, it seems like it's going to be reoccurring. Some things are going to be happening all the time just with the changes. So we want to prepare ourselves and our families, because going through that timeline as you were going through it up on the board there, and as we read it in the report, actually brought back some real sad times, you know, on what our people went through and ourselves during the flooding during January. It was actually quite sad listening to that. And knowing the places that we actually went to, because I was part of our team as well up there, and helping to set up a defence there. Waikato actually went over that side there to help in Pukekohe there and set up a little civil defence area where everybody could go at the time, because I know Auckland was so busy, but we were glad to go and offer that support. I think if anything, just being reflecting on things, take their responsibility as a group here, and being proactive around things, something we can best do, support our communities. Sorry, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ngataki. Councillor Pike.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Erin, for your fantastic report. I think it gives clear reflections for us all to consider. And thoughts that came back from Hamilton City Council was also echoing the need for that PIM resourcing, as it was an issue and theme highlighted by our council as well. I guess I'm just looking for advice, given the LTP that's coming up. Is there a clear ask from our individual councils for extra resourcing that would be required in order to meet some of these recommendations, or do you think we're adequately equipped to respond?
I don't think any council, in all honesty, is adequately equipped to respond to an event of magnitude at all. So if it was to happen at Hamilton City Council, this is my take, and I look to Aaron, who's gone into the report in more depth than me, but the demands on the internal comm staff were the mayor's office needed their own comm staff. The council as an organisation, in terms of it needed its own comms staff. Civil defence was somewhere in the hierarchy and losing its, because civil defence relies on the comm staff from the council and other agencies. But other and I'm not saying it was wrongly prioritised, I'm saying there were other priority comms at conflict. Now, I don't think that anybody's got a standing army of comms people for that emergency. So I don't think any of us are ready for it. I think there's another way of doing it, which is the collective and the sharing of the resource. And culturally, and I talk about organizational culture, is everybody, the feedback I get is everybody's comms managers and everyone's comms say that they are really busy. So there is an argument to be had to do some research. Is that anecdote a fact? And do we need to beef up our collective? But in terms of everybody having the recommendation, I can talk to you online and have a look, because I know a bit about Hamilton cities, but I would say none of us are ready for that without the support. It's just whether or not the group has got the support of the local authorities to release those comms staff to be that pool to move around. I think there's a way of skinning the cat without having additional resource just in case.
Yeah, so I'd be keen to have that.
Deputy Mayor Williams. Your microphone, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just recognise the importance of PIM around this table in times gone by, and it doesn't get any less. And the other thing is too about volunteers. We need foot soldiers. You know, reading the actual bush report and hearing other reports from Hawke's Bay and what have you, at times there is lots of information coming in, but not enough people, or didn't feel like there was enough people being able to handle the flow of information and some of it needed to go to be used by PIM, but then others of it were the essential things like, you know, who's got what helicopter going where, and when it comes to paying for it at the end of it, there seemed to be a lack of information in some places. And having, I suppose it's close to me because I just done the intermediate training program, and yeah, if we can get more of that local expertise, well, I mean, it's not making them experts, but the skill level, the Sims skills, in building more foot soldiers underneath the qualified staff that are around as well.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Brown and then Councillor Buckthorpe.
Push that button. Thank you very much. I just want to address something here that quite often when we have these sort of emergencies with public information management, one of the key issues that we have is communication. Having radios and things and radio stations often are out because the person is actually out of the home or the power goes down. And we're left with a scenario that many of the people are dislocated with having any information. Can we, at a national level or even at a Waikato level, look at the utilisation of cell towers and cell phones, which are going to improve their cover? Well, you already get a civil offence emergency that we've had nationally, and could we utilise that sort of system to actually turn? I'm an ex-soldier, and communication's all about, you know, everything's about communication. Having the ability to communicate with people on the ground is critical. And if we can't do that, we can't manage it. You're just talking, Julian, of people locating in inappropriate places as a shelter, but we can perhaps be able to guide them with something along those lines. Just a simple thought.
Thank you. Councillor Buckthorpe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know we've been on this a while and we probably need to put it to bed. I was just going to comment that, I mean, at the end of the day, we can write all the plans and everything, but every emergency is different, and sometimes there's not a script that can be written how to deal with it, and so it comes down to human intuition in a lot of cases. In the old days, we didn't have the comms that we've got today. How did they get by? So it's yeah. I hear what you're saying about there's more ways to skin the cat. So yeah, I'll be interested to follow that.
Julian.
Can I just, one thing that I wanted to add that builds on, I think, Councillor Brown's comment and all your comments generally. So the comms, there is a real, as governors going back into your own organisations, and I've had this conversation with your staff, but it's just making sure that you're round in the loop. There's a lovely advert on TV that talks about Starlink and Vodafone and One New Zealand making sure that every community has got access to internet or Wi-Fi. What I'm going to say to you is Starlink is a great tool, but please, before any councils go off, and because there's a role for it. We know which communities are going to be without comms, and we can create some resilience in those communities where people can go and let others, family members, know that they're safe and they know they're going to get Wi-Fi. A bit like they did in Waikato, where they all turned up at the hospital because it was the only place that had a Wi-Fi hotspot. But Starlink may not be your answer. And the reason I say that, the advert talks about every community will be covered. But what's coming out is there is different level of coverage. And in an emergency, unless you are part of the emergency services systems, whether it's civil defence, police, fire, fens, etc., there's only so much bandwidth, and Starlink will be told to turn off all the non-emergency stuff. They might be told to turn off community stuff that is not, people might have it in their homes. So the emergency services and critical infrastructure can continue to communicate. So it's not a case of everybody going and buying Starlink and we'll be okay. If we do that, people will buy that kind of kit and be very disappointed when Starlink have to turn it off at the time that they most need it. So it's just put our foot on the ball at the moment and understand as councils and where we're going to be supporting our community, what is the best tool, and that's going to be are they part of the system, and if they are, what's the best tool for them? So that's the plea I give. The other one is I've watched with interest how much interest you as a group, and I'm not surprised by this, have given to this report. And that is reflective of all local authorities and all communities. And again, it's a double-edged sword. It's a really good opportunity for us to engage with our community because they're ready. And same with councils. They want to understand and do more. But we've also got I think there's expectations on the system that have never been there before. Civil defence was never, and we're not resourced to, and I can't think of a group that is, to be able to be first responders and be active instantaneously because we're pulling, talking about Deputy Mayor Williams, we're bringing in people from other parts of business. We don't have a huge professional staff sat there waiting to do a response. So when we turn the system on, it takes some time for the engine to warm and for us to get the people from different parts of council into the coordination centre. So the first responders are still the police, there's still the fire, there's still St. John, there's still the other agencies. We are the people that come in behind and coordinate where necessary. So again, it's that community expectation. Where's civil defence? Where's civil defence? Where's the council? And people are heightened, and we're not currently structured. And I talk about that across the country for that level of response. We're not resourced for that.
Great, thank you. And I'm pleased that everyone's got to have a say on that. On this, Aaron, I echo my colleagues around the table that this was a really good deep dive, and it was a deep dive and very detailed, and I thank you and your team for that. One comment from me is just around the GIS stuff, and I always go into the Natural Hazards portal on the Waikato Regional Council, so I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to that stuff. But I'm really concerned about the RMA reforms and the spatial planning committees and taking that local district plan lens and giving it to a regional committee where we might have, I'm sure TCDC and Hauraki don't need me sitting in the centre of the North Island making coastal decisions or being a part of a coastal decision. So I think there's a much more holistic approach to this. So I'll just finish that agenda item with that comment and have a resolution here that the report, Auckland Emergency Management Report, be received. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Pike and Councillor Brown. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you for the robust conversation on that. Right, we move on to agenda item 11, which is the KEG meeting summary. Thank you, Neville.
Kia ora, members. I'll take the report as read. As you can obviously see, it encapsulates the discussions and decisions that came forward from the KEG meeting on the 10th of March. In the understanding items in section 4, you can see the topics that are on the agenda on a continual basis. And the PCBU discussions, as you can see, focused a lot on the after action report on those issues that you've just heard about in the January and March events, weather-based events, and the learnings that can come from those that will be utilised as part of reviewing the group response framework. So that was a pretty core activity. The group work plan, or you have an update on that on the agenda today under item 12. And the government reform, just noting that those are still to be presented to Parliament, although I do understand the emergency management bill was presented on the 7th of June. So about the same time, I believe, as this report would have been put together. So just recognising that. You also see that those items on the GEC response and recovery costs have already been covered off by Julian this morning, the financial delegations as well. And coming up later on in the agenda are the strat roles, advisory and appointments, committee decision required. For feedback, there was discussions around the LTP budget proposals, and I note they aren't in the agenda today, but I'm not sure what discussion, if any, you would want to have on it at this point. They are still proposals, and I guess the key messages going to Waikato Regional Council is that the joint committee will be proposed to be the final arbiters of the recommendations that are put forward from the group, and that those will go through their own process of consideration and deliberation and then presentation back to Waikato Regional Council. But the key message is that this group is the arbiter on those proposals, and that they have been at this stage in draft format and very, very much in draft, they have been supported and endorsed by both management and governance and KEG. I'm not sure the time frame of presentation, but there's a bit of a tail on the LTP, as you're well and truly aware. So they'll come here in due course. There was an update on the GMO premises as well, and at this stage, as my understanding is, there's a bit of a pause still, given some concerns around potential government funding being released to support the police to undertake their new activity, the new venue. So in the interim, we will continue to locate in the premises that we currently have. The other matters are really for information and reports that we received, some of which are covered off in today's agenda. Look, that's pretty much the summary of the meeting content. Happy to take any questions, which I'll duly transfer to Julian to answer. But those are the matters I wish to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Neville, and I think it's great to know that our technical experts are working way behind the scenes for us. Are there any questions or comments for either Neville or Julian? That being none, the recommendation is that the report of the KEG meeting summary be received. I'm a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Buckthorpe. Deputy Mayor Williams. All those in favour? Against? Carried. We now move on to item number 12, which is the group work plan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is to provide you as the Joint Committee a high-level assurance reporting on the status of the prioritised actions identified in our current group plan and the actions that fell out of the monitoring and evaluation report in 2019 and the COVID after action report in 2020. So you can see in the coloured box below that all priority work programme actions are either on track or off track with appropriate mitigation in place. There is nothing off track that requires help at this stage. I will highlight that one area that is currently off track but with a plan in place is that action that relates to Māori engagement in emergency management, and you at the last meeting or your last meeting agreed to a approach of inviting iwi chairs to or iwi to develop a strategic work program, agree and develop a strategic work program with KEG, and then to provide that to you as joint committee and have iwi chairs sit with you to oversee that strategic work program. So that work is still ongoing in terms of trying to get appropriate people around the table to agree the collectively, that is, agree the strategic work program. I hope to have something more detailed to report to you at the next. In relation to the, there was a comment earlier on about the actions. I think it might have been yourself, Councillor Buckthorpe, but it talked about it would be good to understand where our whole group plan work program is at. And at point 9 of this report, it points out that our current group plan has been in place now for 5 years. So at the next meeting, we will provide you an update of where those group plan actions are in some detail, where those group plan actions are, particularly the one, and remind us all of which ones we took off the working list, because we took some. You agreed to take some work program items, actions out of the, if you want, the annual work programs because of national legislation that was changing. That would have been if you want, an investment that wasn't justified. So we'll give you a holistic overview of everything.
Thank you, Julian. Any questions or comments for Julian? There being none, I'd like to resolve that the report group work plan be received. Can I move and a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Grant, all those in favour? It's carried. We now move on to agenda item 13, the emergency management bill update, which I am sure you've all read. So maybe we could take it as read, Julian, and just point out some key points.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. I'm sure I might be treading on Lily's toes here, but from my perspective, the bill's really interesting. The doesn't appear, or the draft bill doesn't appear to be a huge amount of change at this moment in time, and there are opportunities, I think, that we would want to submit to, whether that's at a face-to-face select committee or at through written submissions. The good news is we have time, because the way that it's been presented is we'll get the first reading probably before Parliament dissolves, but then the select committee will be allocated, and the select committee is going to be for an extended period of time. And the extended period of time is specifically because they are aware that there's a lot of going on around the country into civil defence emergency management that may be able to further influence new legislation in the future. But at the moment, I would say that there's nothing really transformational in what we're being presented. There are a couple of major fishhooks in the back of that legislation around the regulation making of the Governor General and the rule making of the Chief Executive, but the detail around what the priorities of those pieces of work will be are absent. So it's just a case of wait and see, and the team are working on providing you a presentation at the next meeting around what this means for us in the Waikato.
Thanks, Julian. Any questions or comments? I think timing is everything. I think you're right. So thank you for bringing this to the committee. And I think we just need to wait for the presentation and then see what happens on October the 14th and all those different things. So the resolution is that the report group work plan be received. Can I have a mover and a seconder for that, please? Thank you to Councillor Grant and Councillor Ngātaki. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Right, we move on to item number 14, the NEMA update. Welcome, Lily. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Kia ora mai tātou. Can you hear me well?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you through the chair. Kia ora tātou. Huri tēnei no ngā puhi ki Upanoni no nai tūhoi ki roa toki. Nā reira ko Lily Whautahau. E mihi ana kia tātou. Thanks for the opportunity to present. I'm conscious this is my first meeting and I'm apologies for not being there in person. I have a presentation, though it's fine if it's not available. I can just speak quickly to the points.
Unfortunately, we don't have that presentation, Lily.
That's fine, no problem at all. So just to wrap up Julian's points about the emergency management bill, I did want to speak briefly to the process for you on behalf of your communities. So the bill has been introduced on the 7th of June. Thanks for that, Neville. What this means now is that it will be considered by Parliament. So that means Parliament through the Select Committee will be setting the timeframes. So we being NEMA don't have information about specifically when things will be happening. Though what we can say and what has been indicated is that Select Committee will go to referral for Select Committee submissions at the end of June. We don't know yet when Select Committee will call for submissions and when they'll be due, but generally what we do know is that Select Committee calls for submissions soon after the first reading, and generally it allows several weeks before submissions close. So what this does mean is that in theory, if you were to put through a submission, you could start this process now. Usually a Select Committee has 6 months to examine the bill and prepare its report to the whole of Parliament. However, and as what's been noted already, the general election and summer recess means that the Select Committee may not report back until next year. From that point, some bills move either very quickly through the remaining stages of the process, and others have been able to take some time. What I would encourage is to track the progress of the bill, and this is publicly available on the bills.parliament.nz website. And what I'd really like to leave with you today is the encouragement to provide your submissions on the bill through the Select Committee process when it does become available. It really is your thoughts particularly through the recent experiences and the events that our communities have been through that will improve the bill and make the emergency system what we want it to be in the future. So that's the bill. In terms of other priorities, we obviously had the state of emergency and the subsequent transition periods and local transition periods and the ongoing recovery periods that our communities are going through at the moment. In terms of NEMA are currently going through an after action review process, and this is a deep dive into NEMA's role about our response being NEMA into the event. I want to be clear that this is a review into NEMA's role and actions and is not an all of government review or an inquiry. And NEMA has completed a lot of its debriefs and deep dives and internal action review process in May. And there is now planning underway for a national level after action review. This is with the CDM groups and other agencies that, as I understand, are completing their own debrief processes at the moment. What I can say at this time is that further information will be provided at a later stage when this will happen. Finally, there have been appointments in NEMA's Deputy Chief Executive Office. So John Price has formally been appointed in his statutory role as Director of Civil Defence and the Deputy Chief Executive of NEMA. So that means Roger Ball, who has been acting in this role, has returned back to his National Manager of Operations and National Controller role. And then finally, Jenna Rogers, who has been acting in the role of Deputy Chief Executive Strategic Enablement, has now been formally appointed in this role. That is all I have for the moment, but I'm happy to take questions through the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. Are there any questions or comments for Lily? Councillor Buckthorpe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Lily. Philip Buckthorpe from Karakia District Council. Lily, I'd just like to get a NEMA perspective on, and it's something that may, I'm not sure how we'd put it through the submission process, but recently they put a program on telly regarding Wairawa District Council and the situation they have where they've had to fund $7 or $8 million out of their own coffers, which they don't have, where with regard to the Cyclone Gabriel emergency, and I think that's something that needs to change. Can't have councils having to fund. There should be a direct source of funding in that sort of situation that comes from government. Does NEMA have a view on that?
Kia ora, thank you, through the chair. What I can say for the recent events is that there were a range of funding that was made available through the councils, and to that fund specifically, I'm aware of the challenges, and I think it is difficult when the coordination between what I can say national, regional and local councils exist, and I would encourage communication and relationship building in that space prior to events so that when the event does happen, things are streamlined. We have taken, and when I say we, I mean NEMA, have taken the feedback and the learnings from that response into how we consider the system moving forward. And one of the improvements, I say, and when I say improvement, something that I believe personally should already exist, but one of the improvements is, for example, funding between central government and, for example, iwi and Māori marae organisations will hopefully be more streamlined and direct, so that funding goes direct and there aren't things that are holding things in the way. I can't speak too much specifically about the Wairoa funding specifically, but what I can say more generally is that NEMA is taking on this feedback very seriously, and how we can use these learnings to improve the system so that ultimately funding that goes to where it's needed as soon as possible. That's all I have for that, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lily. Any other questions or comments? There being none, thank you, Lily, for being with us this morning, and we look forward to having you with us at some stage in the future. The resolution is that the report National Emergency Management Agency update be received. Can I have a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Buckthorpe, Councillor Pike, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, Lily. Okay. Right, now we'll move on to agenda item 15, which is the appointment of our Group Welfare Manager. Irving, are you?
Thank you, Madam Chair and joint committee members. This report is for information only, and it is to provide an update to the joint committee on the acknowledgement of the appointment of the role of Group Welfare Manager. The role became vacant when myself was promoted to the role of Team Lead Community Resilience and Recovery, and it was proposed or is proposed that Felicia Tananaki be acknowledged in the appointment of Group Recovery Manager. If I just can go to point 8 and 9 of the background, Sia, as we all know her, has been successfully appointed in the Senior Advisory Community Resilience and Recovery role. The selection process includes an assessment of her ability for competencies to perform the role of Group Welfare Manager. There is no legal requirement in the Act for the Joint Committee to approve the appointment. However, the CDM Group have previously requested they to be acknowledged appointment in this role of Group Welfare Manager. The staff recommendations are to receive the report and to acknowledge SIA in the appointment of Group Welfare Manager. Thank you.
Thank you, Irving, and I do appreciate, and I'm sure my colleagues do, that this is purely a technical item rather than, yeah. So, yeah, you move it. So no questions or comments? Right, so the resolution is that the report appointment of Group Welfare Manager be received, and number 2, that the Joint Committee acknowledge the appointment of Felicia Tanaki into the role of the Group Welfare Manager, and moved by Councillor Brown. I'm happy to second that. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Right, now we're going to move into publicly excluded. So can I have a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Grant and Councillor Pike. All those in favour? Against? Carried. And we're just going to pause while we finish the record. Make sure we're not recording. Yeah. You're all done? Great. So as I mentioned